Not really need an introduction. He's our resident storyteller. Every time he gets up to give a speech, he has such wonderful stories to tell us, and this is what he's going to do again tonight. One of the most interesting things about people is how they respond to adversity. In Project 10, Inspire Your Audience, Lloyd will tell us about a former student who raised this question for him. Lloyd Smith and the one after 116.
When I was in high school, I read a book called Isaac Asimov's Biographical Dictionary of Science and Technology. That book was exactly what the title says. It was a collection of about 200 little one-page, one-and-a-half-page biographical essays about important people in the history of science and technology, starting way back with the ancient Greeks and working forward. I've forgotten all of the details about the particular people involved, but I do remember the thought that popped into my mind when I was reading that book. Over half of the little essays started off with something like, although he was enslaved by the Egyptians, or although both of his parents were killed in the 30 Years' War, or although he was sick every day of his life. And then I would go on to explain what this guy had done. And what struck me was that these were extraordinary people. Most of them were geniuses, in fact, who had overcome adversity to do extraordinary things. But if an extraordinary person can overcome adversity and go on to do extraordinary things, why is it that so many ordinary people can't seem to overcome adversity and do even ordinary things? And I wondered about that until I became a high school teacher. And then I began to obsess about it. If you are a connoisseur of whining and griping and excuse making, you need to hang around a high school for a little while. Everybody has got a reason for not being able to do whatever it was they were supposed to do, or an excuse for doing something they weren't supposed to do, but either way the result is the same. Have you noticed we're living in a really strange age? Nobody can seem to say, I screwed up, or I didn't work hard enough, or anything like that. What people are eager to do is find excuses. I heard a perfect one this morning on the radio. I was just dumbfounded by this, and I've been thinking about it all day. There was an ad for a local counseling operation, and it said, has the gloomy weather got you down? Don't just brush it off. You may have SAD, S-A-D, seasonal affective disorder, and you need counseling for this. And so if you rush right in, they'll tell you you should cheer up and the sun will come back in a month. Now, there was a time that's what we told ourselves, wasn't it? I mean, oh boy, what a gloomy day. I'll be happy when April comes and the sun's out again. Not now. You've got a disorder. You need counseling. Well, the point of this little introduction is to introduce a kid named Chris, a kid I met when I was teaching high school at Eastmont. And I was coaching an activity called Knowledge Bowl. I don't know if you're familiar with that or not. It's an academic quiz game. If you visualize Jeopardy, but with four-person teams instead of individuals, you can pretty much get an idea of what the game is involved in. Well, a big part of that, or a big part of coaching that, is finding the right kids. And it's really tricky because you have 4 kids, but you have 6 or 8 subject areas. You have to find a mix of kids for each team that will create some sort of balance so that they don't just sit there and look puzzled when they hear a history question, say, or a science question. So 2 or 3 weeks into the school year, I called together the kids who had been on my team the previous year, told them, okay, we need to replace the 5 or 6 seniors who left, so who do you think we ought to go for? They had various suggestions, and somebody said, well, how about Chris? And he used Chris's last name. I'd prefer not to because he still has family in this area, and some of what you're about to hear is not very complimentary to them. But in any event, they said, how about Chris? And I said, well, I don't know him. And a couple kids said, well, yeah, you do. He's in our 4th period junior honors English class. And he was. I hadn't noticed him because he was one of those kids who are willing to sit there and not talk. They're sometimes very studious. They get a lot out of the class. They just prefer not to be an active part of it like some other kids are. And I said, well, a couple things. First of all, what does this guy know about? He knows about everything, they told me. So he'd be great. He said, yeah, but will he talk? This is the kind of game where you've got to be willing to push a buzzer and give an answer and then put up with somebody saying incorrect and then trying again. Lots of kids surprisingly don't like to hear that word incorrect, and they'll just sit there for the rest of the game, which is not a good way to score points. So I said, okay, get him to come to the next meeting and we'll see what he's got. Kid comes to the next meeting. Sure enough, he was in my 4th period class, and I hadn't even noticed him because he was so quiet, sitting way in the back. And he didn't really say anything at all during the practices, and I thought, this isn't going to work. I mean, even if he goes to one of the competitions, he's probably not going to like it. He just doesn't look like that kind of kid. So the coach from Ephrata calls me up and says, okay, I've got a bunch of new teams this year, and we need to have a practice. Are you willing to drive down after school this week? And I said, sure, I'll run everybody up and we'll do it. We herd everybody into the van, we drive off to Ephrata, we do the matches. Now, I didn't get to see my own teams because the way it works is that the coaches have to read the questions for other matches because it's so hard to find parents who are willing to do that kind of thing. So after the match, the kids come up, and I don't remember whether the team with Chris Leonard won or lost that match. It was a practice match, so it didn't matter. But I asked, how did it go? And everybody said, it went fine. And I knew I would get the score sheets later on. Well, we get into the van. I ask them if they want to stop to eat. They do, so we stop at a McDonald's. And Chris started talking and talking and talking. And he went on a talking jag. It was so strange. You know, because all the other kids were looking at him too, and I was, because I hadn't heard him say 5 words in 3 or 4 weeks of school. It turned out that he not only did well in the game, he knew a bunch of the answers, scored a bunch of points, but he liked it. And we couldn't shut the guy up. He just kept going and going and going and going. And in the end, he was really good at the game. Now, that's nice, but so what? How is that inspiring, which is the point of this speech? It's inspiring for this reason. Chris had a really unusual upbringing. His mom and dad were leftover hippies who lived in the suburbs of Ardmore. Way out in the suburbs of Ardmore. As in no running water, no electricity suburbs of Ardmore. And they had moved out there to get closer to the land, which was okay for them. I mean, they were adults, but they had volunteered 2 little kids to go with them, Chris and his younger sister. And so these kids grew up in the middle of nowhere. I mean, literally, if you've ever been in the suburbs of Ardmore, you know what I'm talking about. They grew up in the middle of nowhere with no electricity, no running water, no sewage system, no nothing. Their parents didn't really make them go to school because, see, they wanted the kids to be free, you know, having this hippie mentality and all that. So their school attendance was very spotty. What had happened was one day their grandmother, who moved to Rock Island, realized what was going on with these 2 kids. She drove her car up to Ardmore and essentially kidnapped them, took them away from their parents, said, you guys are idiots, and she took them down to Rock Island and enrolled them in school and everything was okay. Well, the problem is Grandma didn't have any money. You know, she lived in a little single-wide trailer down in the suburbs of Rock Island. But her heart was in the right place. And it turned out Chris was a wizard. I mean, he was a natural student. And it took him a couple, 2 or 3 years to pick up what he had missed by not going to school regularly when he lived near Ardmore. And he became a really superior student. Pardon me. That's how I ended up with him in my junior honors English class. Now, as he went through his junior year and he started into his senior year, it became obvious this is the kind of kid who really should be going to college somewhere. It's very important. But there was no money. Grandma didn't have 2 nickels to rub together. His mom and dad weren't in the money culture. They were, you know, they grew a little dope, but they mostly smoked it themselves. They didn't even make money selling, you know, which oddly enough, you can't really do. The average drug dealer makes minimum wage and lives with his mom. Did you know? That's anyway, the guy who taught the senior advanced placement English, and I thought, how are we going to get this kid into school and how are we going to find some money for him? Well, luckily, Larry, the other guy, had a brother who was the dean of students at Whitman College. And he called up his brother and said, we need to get this guy into school somehow, but he has no money. And his brother said, well, we can probably arrange that. The private schools have really good financial aid, and this kid had tremendous need. To make a long story short, we got him into school. And the interesting thing was that Whitman had a program, a cooperative program, I don't know if it still exists, with USC. And the kid stayed 5 years in this program, he'd spend the first 3 at Whitman, the last 2 at USC in Los Angeles. He'd end up with a Master of Science degree in aeronautical engineering. And that's exactly what this kid did. He ended up with an MS in aeronautical engineering in 5 years, did college and the master's degree in 5. He's happy and successful, works for Northrop Grumman. He worked on the B-2 bomber and that sort of thing as an aeronautical engineer. What is the point? The point is this. This kid had a perfect excuse to do nothing in his life. Losers for parents, no background, no money, no help, no nothing. And yet, he wouldn't give up. Now, he was helped by having people who were willing to help him, but that isn't enough. You have to have something inside of you. That kid did. Now, if I knew what it was, I'd be rich. I'd be doing workshops and seminars and writing books and whatnot. I don't know. I've never understood what makes some people succeed, whereas other people in the same circumstances don't. But at least there was that one kid who did.
Well done, both of you, with your speeches. Well, they're very interesting. I should tell you, Jeff, that I paid the taxes on a piece of property just ahead of when